Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an absolutely chilling reminder of the crazy and downright frightening events that can take place in the deep dark woods. As ever, I hope you all enjoy this as much as I. And as ever, please do like and share, and don't forget to hashtag Team Fear. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled I Had a Bad Hunt. Let's get straight into that. Some people like to assume the woods are quiet at night. That is not really true. The buzzing, biting, beckoning sounds of nature still surround every heat-stricken, sweat and saliva siphoning, soul-sucking moment. Can you hear it? I still can. Maybe if it wasn't so fucking hot and loud, Steve would have had a better aim. It's a funny thought. Some lacking corner of my brain bet that nightfall among the swinging and sweeping pine trees would provide some shade, but that was a big negative. 90 degrees stayed steady until well past 2 on that northern New Jersey early morning. The second I thought all existing mosquitoes on Earth had been swatted on my skin, some squirming little rodent rustled in the bushes by our right side. Stephen decided to try and shoot it with a pistol that nearly caught me in the thigh. I was about to hold a knife to his neck before he offered up the same excuse. He had been riding the whole night. Such a pussy. Whatever, man. Not worth it. The whole experience was nauseating. I was never a hunter. Steve was my cousin, but that was never a fact worth claiming in public. The kid christened himself the Redneck Cowboy on all of his social media accounts. In his sick mind, somehow, that title had entitled him to post borderline pictures of mutilated animals on the internet. This got him banned from FB, and so naturally, his mum insisted I accompany him on the next hunting trip to Essex County, to keep a watchful eye on the guy, I guess. You're not coming alone this time, bring Matt for company. My mum squeaked at the dinner table, and, much to my shock and surprise, it was decided. After the night's first fight involving a firearm, we set off through the moonlit and foggy hills. The park was empty, and we knew from the get-go that not many other folks would be in that reservation on that holiday weekend. That fact was very much appreciated by my chaotic cousin. The lack of competitors and game wardens made Steve all the more confident. He cocked his rifle and shot it like he was out alone in the prairie. Unseen owls flipped off on nearby trees, only to fall victim to ricocheting and well-aimed bullets. He took down at least 10 of those, not including a fox or two he shot from somewhere along the way. I tried to stay and see if they could be saved, but it must have died somewhere in the woods before I could find the source of its cries. It was at that time, around 5, that I finally had enough. It's time to go home. I shouted over the newly fallen rain. We're wet and you're going to get us both arrested. We're supposed to be here for deer. Oh, you're such a pussy, he repeated while eyeing the distance. Look, something is coming over that hill. We got company. Steve aimed his gun in the distance, presumably using his scope to get a better look. Then he turned to me with an excited laugh. I can't quite get a good look. There's some fog in the way, but it's definitely a person. Let's scare the shit out of them. This was the type of crazy shit that made me the parental assigned warden of the evening. Steve, put down a gun. You cannot fire it at people. I paused, realising that possibility of lives lost would do little to convince this psycho. It could be a bear. You don't want to attract a bear, do you? Too thin to be a bear. Too tall to be a coyote. I think it's a man. I never thought he would actually do it, but in one smooth motion, he stuck his tongue out at me, put his nose to the scope and pulled the trigger. The scream that erupted caused every creature on the ground and in the air to shake and stir. I once watched a documentary that described the effect of a lion's roar has on its surrounding environment. If the deep-toned bellow that followed was not so human-like, I would have thought we'd hit a big cat. I dropped my rifle and reached over to punch Steve in the face. He evaded me easily, laughing the whole time while wrapping his arms under mine. With a quick kick to the groin, I fell to the floor with Steve and my weapon, each well out of reach. He picked back up his gun and aimed it again carefully, while I laid on the ground clutching my pants like an idiot. I should have stopped him. "Oh shit, you scared him away," Steve said regretfully, and then paused. "Quit your crying for a moment. Did you hear that?" After a few throaty gasps, I heard it too. The water falling through the treetop was deafening at that point, but it was a steady rhythm behind that. It became unmistakable a moment later. The puddles nearby shook with the impact of heavy footsteps hitting the ground. The bats and birds in the area scattered around the moon, hiding and waiting for what was to follow. The last thing my cousin Stephen said was, "Shit, get your gun, stupid," before the beast broke through the tree line. It moved so fast the movement felt like a flash. The creature ran on 2 feet. It leaped from an embankment towards the left side of the path and tackled Steve some 20 feet down a hill to my right. My cousin screamed for a moment. The noise was still exiting his throat when the thing cut his jugular. Then he just gagged, and the monster was efficient. It noisily sucked gulps full of blood from the wound, which audible sucklings and slurps. After a short amount of time, I climbed down the hill to sneak a peek at its horrible shape within the shadows. The creature calmly acknowledged my presence with its red eyes through the fog of the night. It was crouched and feasting on Stephen, but after witnessing my approach, it stood to reveal the entirety of its 7-foot hairless frame in the dripping rain. I didn't interpret the stare as a threat, more like a statement of fact. This is our toll. The unspoken message was received. I retreated to my car a mile out of the ravine, leaving the beast to finish the remains of Steve. We did all the right things after that. My family and I went to the police immediately. We told them everything I'd seen, even how I'd left Steve behind. His body was recovered near the scene. The crime was ruled to be an animal attack, and my story about monsters was never believed. Even still, Mum, Aunt Cindy, and I know the truth. They trust what I saw between the trees. Sometimes, the woods has a unique way of collecting its fee. I love my wife. Let's get straight into that. Yes, I love my wife. I tell the policeman for the 3rd time. Yes, I am aware her parents filed a missing persons report, and yes, I know she stopped showing up at work a week ago. No, I can't explain why I didn't report her disappearance to the police. It hadn't occurred to me. I've been busy, but I love her. He is a big man with a round face, and he doesn't believe a word I'm saying. The scratches, they're from a cat, a neighbourhood cat. I'd never seen it before, and no, I don't know why it attacked me. He sighs. I'm such a bad liar. "What's that out there?" he asks. I turn around and look through the glass doors into the garden. I should never have let him in. "What's what?" I ask, feigning innocence. "The mound," he says. "Funny. Looks almost like something's been buried up there." He gets up. "I'm going to take a look." He put his hand on the holster of his gun. I want to tell him not to, but I'm paralysed with fear. He opens the door and walks into the garden. He looks at the freshly dug soil and shakes his head. "What's this then?" he asks. "I don't know," I stammer. He snorts. He must think I'm the dumbest murderer he's ever met. "And there, what's in there?" He gestures towards the shed. "Nothing," I lie. "The spade you used to dig that? The grave? That's what's in there." "No." "He mustn't go in the shed." "How about I take a look?" "Please, there's nothing in there." "Please? Do you really just say please?" he says. He opens the door and steps inside. I lower my head. There's silence, and then a high-pitched, hysterical shriek, and then a series of thuds. Deep breaths, and my hands tremble. It takes time before I compose myself. I go into the shed. It's stuffy. The walls and floor are covered in blood. In the corner, my wife's yellow eyes gleam in the dark. There are wet, tearing sounds as she rips chunks of flesh out of the policeman's dead body. She swallows them without chewing, along with the strips of cloth from his uniform. She must be very hungry. She stops eating and trains her yellow eyes on me, and then stalks towards me through the dull heat, making snuffling sounds with her snout. When she reaches me, she rubs her huge face against me with great affection, leaving streaks of brown, drying blood on me. She puts her enormous paws around me and pulls me against her taunt, lean body. I smell her barnyard scent and her coarse fur scrapes against my face. She mewls and I put my arms around her. It's been a week and I'm no longer scared. Her long, sharp talons press against my back, but I know she doesn't mean to scratch me. She loves me as much as I love her. A wonderful night for a hunt. Let's get straight into that. Took me 15 years to track down the monster who murdered my family. I found him in a bar, of all places. He wasn't there to drink though. He sat with his back against the wall, his glass of beer barely touched. No, he was just killing time until the full moon. I ordered a beer, took a seat in the corner and deliberately kept my eyes off of him. His kind always knew when they were being watched, and instead I waited and listened until I heard the sound of a chair screeching against the grimy floor. I perked up but didn't move until I heard the sound of a pickup screeching out of the parking lot. I threw some money down onto the table and hurried to my car. After tracking him across 20 states, finding him in a forest was trivial. He'd gotten sloppy, hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. I followed them, through the well-trodden footpaths onto the overgrown trails and into the uncharted wilderness that authorities had ordered the public to stay away from due to animal attacks. I had to hurry. The sun had almost completely set and the full moon would be up soon. I wanted this conversation to be man to man, not man to beast. I found him in a clearing. He was still preparing for the hunt, rooting around in a duffel bag and pulling out his tools, an assortment of knives, an axe and a single gun that had been designed to take down elephants. I knew them well. He had used all of them to kill my family. Wonderful night for a hunt, I said. I might have given up the element of surprise, but it was worth to see the look on his face when he shot up and turned his face to me. The moment of shock passed, and then he was coiled like a spring, ready to strike at the slightest hint of danger. Can I help you? He asked. Sorry, I was just passing through and couldn't help but notice that you were getting ready for a hunt. I'm something of a hunter myself, I said, nodding to his equipment. He relaxed just a little, and that was all that I needed. I stepped forward into the moonlight so he could see me, really see me, see the hair sprouting across my face and the fangs in my mouth. I swiped at him with my claws and he rolled away out of reach of both me and his toys. He took one look at me and then he bolted into the forest. I dropped down on all fours and let loose the howl that had been building in my throat and gave chase. It really was a wonderful night for a hunt. A prospecting trip. Let's get straight into that. I remember that it was the first month of 1922 when the events that I relate to you now took place. My long-time compatriot Harry Watkins and I had been engaged in Imperial Mineral Industries to carry out a preliminary, somewhat secretive expedition into the Ural region to seek out mineral deposits, in particular manganese, which was much in demand at the time. We had found ourselves in their employ on numerous occasions since the Great War, to not inconsiderable financial benefit to them and ourselves. In fact, it was a work of this nature which led to my first meeting with Watkins and was instrumental in forming our long-lasting friendship. It was unusual to venture into such an area at this time of year, given the inclement weather conditions, but the political and industrial upheavals in recent years meant that the area was open to outside investments to an unusual degree. We had been given only a short time to prepare, so we took an IMI ship, the Lagan Valley, a single funnelled steamer on about 430 feet in length from Newcastle upon Tyne to the Kristiansand in Norway, there to equip with the requisite cold weather clothing and supplies. Originally a passenger vessel with berths for around 600 passengers, and she was now a somewhat battered tramp steamer, although those cabins had been maintained very well and appointed. We enjoyed a comfortable first leg before transferring to a second boat eastwards along the Russian coast. We procured the equipment we required and booked a passage on the MV Ringar, a newer Norwegian-built ship driven by twin modern Sulzer Windsor diesel engines. With a length of 415 feet, the hold was large and the cabins were simple and clean, but to my eye they lacked the charm of our rooms on the Lagan Valley. The ship was efficient and fast, powering across the water with ease. We entered the Kara Sea, passing Severny Island before turning south into the Gulf of Ob on January 5th, finally landing at Novi Port 3 days later after numerous stops along the way. The trenchant wind encouraged us to spend most of our time below decks, and we took the opportunity to carry out thorough preparations before transferring to a final boat along the Ob River. This last vessel was a forlorn-looking old lady indeed, but she was perfectly seaworthy and adequate for our needs. The skipper found the idea of our winter expedition highly amusing, telling us that he thought us not only insane, but most probably doomed as well. What we could pick up of the crew's conversation confirmed their preconceptions of the English, being that a race of madmen, the unhurried attitudes of local boatmen ranked somewhat, but we were at their mercy utterly, and quickly relented in our attempts to expedite the matters in a more timely fashion, finally alighting at Yarsau Lake on the 12th of the month. Imperial Minerals had received information of possible manganese deposits in the regions north of the River Ob, and so we set out the morning after our arrival. Having spent our time on board ship productively, we had procured a small team of local ponies to pull our sleds, and we made good time on the first day. The terrain closer to the town was quite gentle. As we ventured further north, conditions became more hostile to progress, but never to the point that we or our ponies ground to a halt. We had set up camp on the fourth day towards dusk. As we started to hear wolves calling to each other, we picked a sheltered spot at the foot of a small ridge just inside the tree line. In order to conserve our supplies, we usually tended to hunt local quarry, but pickings had been scarce, so we made a simple stew with some of our dried meat. It would not usually have been very appetizing, but we were both ravenous, and its aroma caused our stomachs to grumble loudly. The cooking smells and gentle amber glow that our camp fire cast across the snow made the atmosphere quite pleasing. We were sitting by the fire, and something caught Watkins' attention. I turned to follow his gaze, and although I saw nothing at first, after a moment the shadows yielded a dishevelled human figure. Watkins and I instantly put our hands to our pistols, but a voice like gravel cracked the cold air. "There's no need to be drawing them weapons, gentlemen. I was just hoping that that you might spare a bowl of that soup there." I was tempted to move the newcomer on, but I found myself thinking of an occasion a few years previously, where we had cause to call upon the charity of a stranger in much the same manner as this. Watkins and I had ventured into the deserts of western Texas and, through the events that I may tell in another time, became stranded without transport and rapidly dwindling supplies. We spotted a caravan in the distance and made our way towards it. Unfortunately, the occupant was present and beckoned us in to the firelight. He motioned us to sit and gestured for us to serve ourselves from his cooking pot, which we gratefully did. We ate in silence and sat a while before the man threw over a large skin of water, which Watkins and I took as an invitation to leave. As I stood and thanked him, I realised that firstly, he had never once uttered a word to either of us, and secondly, he had never taken his hand from the stock of the rifle balanced across his lap. Watkins and I wordlessly agreed to allow the newcomer to approach, and Watkins stood to retrieve a bowl and spoon, which he filled from the pot and held out to him. The man approached, and the firelight revealed his bedraggled appearance to us. He was even more of a shambles than he had first seemed. He wore a ragged outfit of mismatched skins and furs, which I guessed had been assembled over a long period of time, and his long grey hair and beard almost covered his aged face, though not to the degree that it obscured the ruin that was left inside. The firelight cast black, uneven shadows across the crags and valleys of his cheek and forehead, and where once had resided his eye, there was merely a yawning black pit. "I am obliged to you both," the man said, in an impossible to discern accent, as he sat on a fallen log and began to eat, with a polite manner completely at odds with his appearance. He picked out the chunks of meat with a simple-looking knife, the blade of which shone like amber in the firelight. The three of us sat in silence and ate until the food was gone, after which quiet descended on the camp, broken only by the crackling of the fire. After a while, the stranger asked us what business brought us out into the wild in such a season. Watkins and I shared a glance before telling the story that we were simply a pair of fur trappers. Perhaps the stranger cast a faintly amused glance at our sleds at this. Perhaps I only imagined it. He went on. "You fighting men? Ever seen the war?" The sudden shift in topic took me by surprise, and I wondered which war it was to which he was referring to. But Watkins and I both nodded, and the man continued. "I fought all over God's earth, all across these last 45 years. Black Hills back home, fought the sheep-eaters, fought Victoria and Nana in Mexico too. Marched with the Russians against Nippon, and then against the Austrians in the Great War. I'd guess that was yours, judging by your ages." Again, we nodded without speaking. "After fighting with the Russians, the first time I stayed in the country, something about all this space called to me, I suppose. Did myself some trapping, some gold digging too, till my companions took exception to my going, though their possessions." He laughed at this, the sound mingling with the sound of the trees creaking in the wind. "Chased me out of the snow in the ice, they did. I kept running. Should have paid more heed to the ground under my feet though, 'cause it was a mighty shock to hear ice giving way under my weight. Before I knew it, I'd gone into the icy water. Couldn't get out neither, the ice just kept cracking around me. Called out for help, but those devils only laughed. Wished me luck, and left me to die out there in the lake." There was another long pause, only the wind sweeping across the plain outside, the forest disturbed by the bitter night air. "I thought I was ready to draw my last breath right there, when the Lord smiled on me, I guess. And a Styak man, out ice fishing I suppose, toshed me a line and dragged me out to that icy water. Guess he didn't expect to catch like me on his trip." Again came that dry, cracked laughter, and another long pause. "Took me in, they did. Got me well. Stayed with them for a time. Made a life for myself, I did. Till the war called me back to fight. Learned a lot. Wonderful things they showed me. Terrible, wonderful things." His speech seemed to tell as he gazed into the campfire, and I found myself wondering what memories were playing in his head, while simultaneously feeling that I might be more comfortable never knowing. His next question came after an eternity, during which he seemed to consider the wisdom of asking it. "You boys ever killed a man?" This time we did not answer at all, staring into the flames, but it seemed that the stranger already knew the answer to this. "I guess you did. Been fighting men, I know. You did. I can smell it on the both of you. Always can. Maybe on the account of all the lives I ended." Something in the matter-of-fact manner in which he spoke chilled me to my core. Of course, both Watkins and I had course to take human life, either for king and country during the war, or to protect ourselves from harm whilst travelling. The strangest question brought to mind an account that Watkins had related to me some time before. We had become entangled with a gang of criminals in Tangier, and I had been forced to draw my pistol and fire at one of the men. The second round struck him in the throat, and the gang scattered, and we were able to make our escape. But I felt no small degree of remorse over killing the man. I had attempted to drown my sense of guilt in a bottle, and Watkins had joined me. The pair of us became increasingly intoxicated and, perhaps in an attempt to salve my conscience, Harry told me of the first man he had killed. At one point early in the war, Watkins' section had broken through into a deeper enemy trench, which, at that moment, happened to be occupied. Watkins had almost fallen down into the pit and, lunging forwards, thrust his bayonet into a young soldier's side. His momentum brought him forwards, and his blade carried on through the German, tearing a grievous wound across his abdomen. Watkins' comrades carried on into the trench, firing as they went, leaving him to watch the young man's attempt to gather his spilled innards back into his body, crying for his mother as he died. Gathering his wits, Watkins fired his rifle, ending a soldier's torment. Even in my inebriated state, I could plainly see how distressing it was for my dear friend to relive this moment, and I felt the deepest respect for him, that he should try to assist me at such cost to himself. When we woke the next day, we both were suffering badly due to the amount of drink we had consumed. Watkins seemingly had no memory of our conversation, and I chose not to embarrass him by bringing the matter up again. The stranger spoke again, jarring me back to the present. "You ever wonder what it must be like to really hunt? Now, I don't mean pointing a rifle, quick and easy, bang!" He mimed, shouldering a weapon and firing. He continued, enthusiasm building in his voice. No, I mean stalking prey, chasing it down, smelling the terror as it makes its best bid, bringing it down with your own two hands, ending its life with your teeth and tasting the life pouring out of it. The tone of his voice disturbed me greatly. I had from time to time seen animals hunt, and had been fascinated by the manner in which predators could work together, or hunt alone, and make their kills with such terrible grace and power. Here, there seemed to be a deeper passion for the hunt. Our guest seemed to take such pleasure in the thoughts he was expressing. The thoughts he was expressing, the impression that he might be speaking of personal experience surfaced, although I forced it back down. "There was a summer when I saw the strangest thing," the stranger continued, seemingly to emerge from the sweetest reverie. "The man who saved me from the lake left the village long after sundown. I followed him, just out of curiosity, I guess. Maybe he was meeting his sweetheart out in the woods, eh?" And he laughed, and his laugh once again. "I followed into the forest a long way, only to see that man enter a clearing and start to strip off. I watched him as he took a knife and drove that blade into the nearest tree, and then he started to sing out. I had no idea what he was saying, but as the song ended, he got down on all fours, and..." The man fixed us both with his gaze, looking from one face to the other. "He got down on all fours, and he started to change. I could hear him cry out as his body stretched in impossible ways. I shut my eyes tight, though I could still hear, and when I looked again, there wasn't no man in that clearing, just a wolf. That wolf just stood for a second, and then it turned and dashed from my sight. I was rooted to the spot for hours. Maybe I ought to just left it all behind, but something kept me there all night long. Anyhow, just as the sky started getting pale, there he was, a man again, looking right at me. He didn't seem all that taken aback to see me, neither. He said nothing as he dressed, and we walked back to the village together. I didn't have any clue what he was thinking, or even if I was safe, but I followed him like a little lost lamb, and we got back home, and that was that.
Except it wasn't, of course. A few nights later, I was shook awake by my friend, who jested I should follow him. Not knowing what else to do, I went out after him. After we walked a while, I recognised that same clearing in the forest. I took fright. I'll confess to you boys, to see the man draw his knife, that same knife, but he held it out to me, handle first, and so I took it.
He pulled a blade from his pack.
This knife,
he said, and I recognised it as the blade I'd seen him use while eating. The blade that caught the firelight in such a striking manner. I saw now that the blade was not steel at all, but looked like copper, and there was some kind of design carved into the scales of the handle.
He then took a second knife, just like this one, and plunged it into the tree, and bid me to do the same. I saw what he had in mind, and I felt sick with fear of what he might do if I refused. I felt trapped, so I did it. I stuck that tree, and my friend started to sing. As that song finished, I started to feel it, almost like my insides were turning to water. I stumbled to the ground with agony of it, such that I thought I might lose my wits. Every limb felt like it was getting pulled from its socket, and I thought my back was breaking, but then all that pain and fear was gone, and in its stead I felt the sweetest of sensations washing over me. The light of the moon let me see everything in blue and grey, ain't it? Felt like my ears caught every little noise, and the scents, the scents. I could smell the very earth itself and every flower and beast for miles around, and for a time I felt dizzy with it all. And then I saw my friend, a wolf now too, and with that we were off into the trees. We ran together all night, low to the ground, and we sparred, and we hunted, and we howled, all for the joy of it. And I went back the next night, and the next. Over time, we found that other wolves, real wolves I mean, lost the fear of us, and ran with them too. I never felt so free as when I left the man's world behind and just ran, like I was closer to everything. It was the finest thing to live that way. I carried on like that for a long while, till it looked like the war was starting up again. Thought I'd go back to fight again, and didn't know why, but just felt like going home in a strange way. I just left it all behind without much thought at all. I was making my way westward, moving from town to town. I travelled with a lot of trappers and prospectors. Then one night, I saw one of my old friends, one of the old men who left me in that frozen lake years before. It took me a minute to remember him, and he didn't recognise me at all, of course. Guess I'd changed a lot in the meantime.
He laughed. I had a terrible feeling that I knew where this story was leading, but said nothing. I was unable to ascertain which would be the worst outcome, knowing or not knowing. I found out where he was bedding down for the night, and then went out into the woods and took out that knife and sang that song, and then I slunk back to his camp. Worked my way between them tents to where he was laying, and slowly pushed my way into the shelter. I stood over him for a moment, and then I had the nice idea to wake him up. I wanted him to know what was going to happen to him, you see. So I woke him up by snuffling at his ear. Took him a good long time to awaken, it did, but at last he looked up at me. Maybe he thought he was dreaming, but when he properly saw me, his eyes got real wide. Before he could even cry out, I put my teeth to his throat, took my time with him, made him real sorry. And when I was done, even his own mother wouldn't have recognised him. And again he laughed, that crackling, dry sound. Watkins and I shared an uneasy glance. By now I felt sure that the man was a lunatic, and although his story was preposterous, he did seem to believe it, and quite probably presented a danger to us. I confessed to no small degree of fear, such that I quietly edged my hand back towards my holster. Seeing that my friend was doing the same in the thought that our guest might move to attack us. Watkins broke the uncomfortable silence at last, informing the stranger carefully that we needed to rest and that he should be on his way. Immediately his manner changed, where he had been intense before. Now a forced cheerfulness prevailed. He spoke again, with a small laugh that rang false, utterly.
Oh no, boys, I was just trying to have a joke with you. Thought I'd scare you with a spooky story or two. Ain't you ever told stories round the campfire?
Our demeanour made it clear that he had worn out his welcome, however, and he sensed this. Again his manner changed, becoming contrite, and he slowly started to gather his few belongings.
My apologies to you both, ya. Sometimes I forget how to behave around company these days. I don't meet many folks out here, you see. Guess I forgot my manners and that.
The strange copper knife was returned to the pack, the last of the old man's possessions to be put away. Without speaking, that strange old man stood, looked into the flames of our fire for a moment, his eyes sparkling with reflected light, and then turned and walked out into the night. Harry and I said nothing for some time, simply mulling over the man's strange, disturbing story. I found it difficult to forget the sense that he spoke with utter conviction as he told us of those impossible things, or to put aside the memories that his tale had stirred within me. We sat, feeding the fire, barely speaking until the morning came. Although we had not slept that night, neither of us wished to linger, and after a rushed breakfast we broke camp and were ready to move on before the sun had properly risen. Lastly, we doused the fire with shovels of snow before urging our ponies to begin the trek again. After about 50 yards or so, some feeling caused me to turn back to take one last look at the site of our strange encounter. As I watched, an old, scarred grey wolf appeared from the remains of our fire. It met my gaze without apprehension or apology, and I entertained the strangest notion that some indefinable connection had been made. The old wolf blinked its one amber eye and vanished into the forest. I watched it for a moment, and then turned and walked on after Watkins, in silence. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed those short stories there, compilation of short stories, should I say. Please, as ever, do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. As ever, huge thank you to the authors for letting me narrate their stories and their incredible dedication to the work. Really do enjoy reading their stories. Please do share and like and comment, guys. Don't forget, if you haven't already, check out the private Facebook group, DMT's Cabin in the Woods. Be great to see you all over there. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.